So welcome everyone to the second panel, aka the cooler panel. No shade to you, Alex. It's a very long topic, but it just shows like the magnitude of the conversation that we're about to have, and our experts are going to walk us through. But before we begin, I have a little fun fact about this panel. So did you know that they all have unique and, dare I say, gorgeous names? So we have June over here. I told her that if she brings the sun, because her name is literally today's month, right? If she brings the sun to this event, then, she's solid. And this week has been great. So thank you, June, for the amazing sun. And then, I know, right? What a good day. And then we have Chanell. If we just remove the L, it's like, I'm guessing you're being named after the luxurious brand. And my favorite perfume, Chanel No. 5. So
that was the inspiration.
I guessed as much.
Perfume at the time as well.
Look at that. And then we have Vari. So her name is actually pronounced differently from how it's spelled. That is really interesting. And it is a Scottish name as well. So it's just amazing. And then here I am. I'm just Perle. But a lot of people call me Beyonce of tech policy. But you guys can call me Beyonce as well. So either way, it's just to show how amazing these names are. But then just beyond that, just how unique these panelists are beyond their names. And we're about to find out right now. So we're going to kick it off. And I guess my first question to you all, you have a minute to answer, is we're going to try to understand the current landscape that we're in when it comes to AI and technologies. But before we kick it off, where you start, I want to know, what was your favorite cartoon growing up? And this is a question for everyone. Y'all will tell me after. So to kick it off, what was your favorite cartoon growing up? And then tell us about the landscape of AI and technologies and, whether it's designed for children or not. So I'm going to give it up to you, June. You brought the sun, so I might as well give it to you. So let's get started.
Thanks, Perle. Okay, favorite cartoon. It's a bit obscure. David the Gnome. Show of hands, if anyone's...
Okay.
Oh my gosh.
Nice.
Okay, amazing. We'll talk after. So David the Gnome, he's a gnome. He lives in the woods. He's also a doctor, and he goes around on his fox like a horse, and he fixes animals who are hurt, which really set too high expectations for future career paths. But I think the other thing I didn't realize is that in the cartoon, gnomes live to be 400 years old. And did you know the season begins and they're 399? I did not see the last episode of that show until I was in my 20s, and I still want to cry thinking about it. So David the Gnome, check it out. In terms of understanding the current landscape, I think we've already heard a lot of examples of how children are interacting with digital technologies and AI. So alongside things like gaming, social media, I want to add a couple of other examples, including some work we're doing at the Royal Society on assistive technologies for, inclusive technology that helps kids to learn, to play, to be creative, despite their abilities. Educational tech, of course, sort of dovetails with that category. But I think also it's important to note that in terms of the sort of footprint that children leave online, it's not just where they directly interact with AI. There's a lot of data around, about children vis-a-vis their parents, for example. So by the age of 5, there's something like 1,500 photos of the average child. It's according to Ofcom, and I think that's an outdated stat, actually. I'm expecting a child in October, and the targeted advertising I'm getting includes things like smart baby socks, which is a thing now. So I think I'm increasingly aware of the kind of digital footprints that children might be leaving online, even long before they're interacting with AI as such. So I wanted to add that.
Oh, nice. Thank you so much for that. Smart baby socks. When it's my turn, I don't know what is going to exist, but we'll see. Okay, so Chanel, your favorite cartoon, and tell us about the landscape of AI in relation to children.
Okay, so for me, my favorite cartoon is a cartoon called Powerpuff Girls.
Ooh.
And in that, there's a character called Buttercup.
Yes.
She is socially awkward and moody and gets angry, and she's by far the best fighter out of all of them.
Far.
And that's, I feel like I aspired to be her when I was younger. And I suppose for me, Yeah, like, I mean, and with the discussion earlier today, like, we were talking a lot with, like, where we see children as being the kind of, like, the direct consumer of the technologies, but actually with most of what I work on, and especially, like, it's technologies that probably have more of a kind of business to business type of focus. Here, it's actually, I would say that there is so much movement and so much happening where AI is just becoming a part of our lives, and even as adults, and there isn't really a differentiation of what that means for children versus what that means for an adult. So if we're even thinking about things that might be deployed in public spaces, like things that might be relying on, CCTV cameras and things like that, like, we know where the rule sits, but actually in practice, does this really mean that children are being protected in those spaces? And yeah, that's probably more where I spend quite a bit of my time.
Okay. Well, we have a lot to discuss. I have a lot of questions around that too. So Valerie, same question to you. Favorite cartoon? What is that landscape looking like for you today?
Yeah. Favorite cartoon is a really, really hard question, and I wish I had that longer to agonize over that one. I'd probably say maybe Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. Although here in the 90s it was Teenage Mutant Hero Turtles.
Yeah.
We can get into that. My mum was an art teacher. I think she thought that the names of the turtles was going to really get me into art history, but it just got me into like bubblegum pizza. In terms of the landscape of AI, I mean, lots already been said, but I think AI is very much integrated into children's everyday lives, into all aspects of children's everyday lives, and from the earliest ages. So everything from smart toys that children are playing with as infants and in preschool, smart devices in the home that may not be designed for children, but children are using them for entertainment or to ask for information from. In educational settings, lots of ed tech in schools and AI systems that are personalizing learning or monitoring students' learning and attainment within school settings. And then there's lots and lots of AI systems that are having impacts on children's lives that are maybe not so visible. So AI systems that are processing information to make decisions about children and their families in healthcare, in housing, in social care, all aspects of children's lives. So I think it's really there's so much that we could talk about and explore when we think about the relationships between AI and children. Some of it is designed for children, some of it is used by children, and some of it is kind of the wider, integrated into wider society.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. Yeah, in terms of like systems, you are right. Like it indirectly impacts them, but it is happening with AI. So that's really good. Thank you all for your contributions on that question. So I'm going to get started with the nitty gritty. And I recently read your research. You worked with the Scottish Alliance, and you went on the ground, spoke to children. So I was able to pull a few quotes from the children themselves, which was pretty cool. And the first quote was, "Is the school bell AI? I think it is." Well, I mean, this is an 8-year-old Scot basically asking the question. So my question to you now is, what touch points do children have with AI today? And are they generally aware that they're interacting with AI? Like, the child thought the school bell is AI. So what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, that's a really interesting example. So this was from a 2-year collaboration that we've had with the Alan Turing Institute, with the Scottish AI Alliance and Children's Parliament. And so for the past 2 years, we've been working with 4 primary schools across Scotland, and working with children between ages of 8 and 12, the same children over a 2-year period, and exploring kind of their current understandings around AI, their relationships with AI, and how they want to be involved in shaping the future of AI. And it's really interesting, like that example of, is the school bell AI? That came through a kind of conversation where, at the beginning when we introduced AI, and I should say this was before ChatGPT was released, so I think that might be a slightly different conversation now. But when we first introduced AI, most children had heard the term. They'd heard of AI, they'd heard of artificial intelligence, didn't always know those two things were the same, and they had a sense that it was something that was in their lives, and they would often say computer games, or the internet, but they didn't necessarily know pinpoint what it was. Alexa and Siri also came up quite a lot, but then when we started to discuss, and a lot of our early discussions were sort of focusing on, it's not, I mean, it can be robots, but it's not robots. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking mostly about computer programmed systems that make decisions that might influence decisions in different areas of your life. And then they started working through, well, is it this, is it that? And the school bell was one example. And it's an interesting example because obviously there are AI systems that can be connected to devices, and there might be an AI system that has some kind of influence influence or control over how that device or that thing works, but the thing itself might not actually be AI. But that was an interesting example of where the children were able to kind of really grapple with that and start to work out, well, okay, is it this? Is it that? Where is it in my daily life?
I mean, that's pretty cool. I feel like we're looking at people who are going to join the Royal Society soon, so be on the lookout for that. So this question is to Chanell. So another quote from one of the children, she was 9-year-old. It says, "I know I use AI on Face ID, but what if it doesn't recognize me when I'm older?" And I'm like, well, that's a good question. So now that question, I'm going to tie it to ethical frameworks and the one that exists. Like, we have current best practices. And so what happens as well, like, how do they catch up with the new technologies that are coming in play? Like, when these children get older, when the society gets older, how will these frameworks catch up, and how can companies implement them to protect children?
Well, I would say, and I know that this is probably like, well, my job is risk, so I am going to be more negative than probably some more optimistic views earlier today. But for me, there is already a very wide gap between what is, what's being created and potentially also what's being researched, at least what's being researched that's available to companies or that I've seen, and what the guidance that's available for a company to actually be able to do the right thing. I mean, we've talked a lot about, we have regulation coming, and within the EU AI Act, of course, there's also going to be like stipulations that come into play in terms of thinking about what it means for children's rights, or like manipulating and vulnerabilities based on age and things like this. So in that way, we could kind of say that there is some form of stick. And, when it's, I think with more public awareness, especially more awareness coming from places like schools, organisations and things like that, we can probably say that there is a carrot there for companies to really want to do the right thing, because it actually makes good business for them. Like, even at prototype levels, we're finding companies being asked a lot more questions about how do you respond to ethical concerns, just because in the public consciousness, if you mention you do AI, you work with AI, there is a level of distrust there that companies are working with. But if we think about, let's say, using that kind of carrot and stick example, like the road for a company to be able to go down to be able to manage those risks and do the right thing, I think that's where it becomes quite challenging, because where we do have a lot of frameworks and standards, and it's not that I'm on a standards committee. I understand how challenging it is to be able to draft and work things that can be translatable and used by everyone and be agreed by all these different committee and members as well. But where we do have this, like, there is a challenge in terms of like understanding that this is something that was written by people that may have a lot of previous experience, that might come from a social science background, that might be very used to policy language, or kind of, at least kind of social science language in terms of breaking down challenges. But actually for, let's say you're a developer, it may be a team of 5, it may be even smaller, even when it's bigger, being able to translate what that means for you and what you're building, it's very, very challenging for companies to do that. And it's not necessarily because they don't want to, it's just because it's, like being able to get that information is not easy. And even, like when I was, leading child safety work at a medium-sized platform in the UK, we had, trying to even find an expert that would work with us was challenging. And you're talking about, a budget that's committed with having, approaching 30 million users, 400 people. And I believe Charlotte Ainsley is here. And I have to say that when you agreed to do it, I probably cried, because it was so hard to find people that weren't just telling us to do better, but were actually willing to come and lift the lid and actually be able to help us to move further along. That's even more important to find for AI companies. But for them, they tend to be needing that help when they are much, much more smaller and much earlier stages of their journey.
Yeah, no, I mean, there definitely is a challenge, like in terms of like finding the research and like helping draft these frameworks and like that level of trust. So thank you for that, Chanell. And this is for June. So another quote from a 10-year-old. They said, "I don't think it's fair that children get to experience bias. If only white children have their data taken from AI, then AI will recognize others and they might feel left out. Wow, this 10-year-old is really smart. And so my question to you is, what are the potential risks and opportunities associated with children's use of AI technologies, and how can industry, academia, all these people work together to mitigate this risk?
Thank you for the question. I mean, first of all, I would love to see something like what the Turing did reproduced with people who make decisions on AI. I think some of their definitions might be equally interesting.
Exactly.
It's something that we encounter, at least when we work with, say, policymakers. Not naming any names. But in terms of risks and opportunities, I want to kind of bring us from the abstract and zoom in on maybe a very concrete use case, which is around digital assistive technologies as a really key opportunity here. So there are about 240 million children with disabilities around the world, and about 2.5 billion people who would benefit potentially from digital assistive technology around the world. Some of these include hardware, but increasingly these are AI-enabled tools, even things like cell phones being considered assistive technologies. So I was able to visit some of our partners in India back in March and actually interview some people who are making assistive tech to get children back into mainstream education. And I think the potential for really changing those children's lives is incredibly strong. So one example is an augmentative and an alternative communication device called Avaz, which is voice in Hindi. And it's enabling children who are otherwise unable to kind of communicate or have their voice to actually interact with their own parents, and of course through AI potentially even use their own voice to sort of be able to generate conversations that sound unique to them, which is really special. Another example is actually a diagnostic tool called Gift Alexia. So this involves an AR headset that a child can wear, which both traces their eye movements but also presents text in different forms and formats. And so it kind of reframes dyslexia as something that the child has within them, but rather presents it as something that's more a function of the way that information is presented to them. And so rather than treating them as outliers on the distribution of children in India seeking education and therefore potentially being excluded, it reframes that problem into something that's more environmental and potentially something that could be aided with technologies. So I think there are a number of really exciting examples like that. I think data is a huge challenge because there's a massive footprint of exclusion when it comes to disability, but specifically children with disability. UNICEF's done UNICEF has done some amazing work on this, so improving that picture. But at the same time, childhood is not sort of a universally defined thing. Adolescence as a concept doesn't exist everywhere in the world. So these kind of ages, and I think maybe it was Maximilian who pointed out the sort of arbitrariness of the age of 16. I think, when it comes to the data that can support these tools, we do need to sort of clarify and perhaps standardize some of these very simple and very basic metrics so that we aren't leaving out anyone.
Thank you. Just like you just listed all of these like really amazing technologies, like it's just very heartwarming because a lot of times we think of AI and it's like they're going to take over our jobs, but it's like, no, there are also like a lot of assistive learning technologies that they have out there for children, and that's pretty cool. So my question is for you, Vari. Another quote is from a 10-year-old that says, "I know a wee bit of AI because of my sister," right? And so this is just kind of tying it all back to the conversation that you had with these children. And then I guess to anyone who's interested in having this type of conversations, like how do we get involved with like bringing children into the conversation? And then could you share more about like that experience? How did you enjoy being amongst children? And then how did they influence the input that you guys all had in terms of your research?
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's been the most amazing experience over the last 2 years working with these schools. The rationale behind all the work we do in the Children AI team, and I'll point out my colleagues Sabia and Morgan are here as well, who catch them after to hear more about this work, because they work on the Children AI team at the Turing. And the driver behind all of this work is recognizing that children are probably the group that will be most impacted by AI, but they're also the group that are least represented in decision making about design, development, deployment, but also governance and policy making around AI. And so that's really the driver behind this work. Like, how can we get children involved in these conversations? And so through this process, the children have shared their views on how they want to be involved. Catapult and have shared really developed ideas about their visions of the future of AI and what that would mean and what that would look like. And lots of examples of learning, but also of us learning, of how we put that into practice. And it's so important. I mean, we think about something like generative AI. Like, how many adults grew up with generative AI in their lives? Like, literally zero. Like, no adult grew up, had the experience of being a child with generative AI. It just didn't exist. So children are the only experts in this, are the only generation that have experience of being a child with generative AI technologies. And so when we think about the risks those technologies present or the benefits they might present, we need children in those conversations to understand their actual relationships with those technologies, to understand how they actually navigate the spaces in which they're engaged with those technologies and how they might use them. And if we don't have those conversations, then when we're thinking about policies, we're thinking about regulation, or we're thinking about development practices, we're always starting from adults' assumptions about how those technologies might be used or what their impacts might be. And even with the best of intentions, those assumptions don't necessarily reflect the actual experiences or needs or concerns of children. And so in this work, we're really trying to explore how we can put that into practice, bring more children into those conversations, and looking now to look what that might look like in relation to generative AI, which is an area where there really hasn't been much involvement or consideration of children in those spaces. And so, in terms of what people can do, I mean, certainly look for opportunities to bring children into these conversations. Look for opportunities not to make assumptions about children's experience or needs, but really to actively engage with children and to find out firsthand what their experiences are, what their concerns are, what their interests are. And then be open to being completely surprised.
Wow, no, thank you. I mean, you make a good point where it's like they grew up with Gen AI, and it's like they are the ones who are going to have a better understanding and have good inputs for this. We're going to our last question now, and then to use the quote that Maximilian gave us, 20% of the children. They are the population, but they're 100% the future. So now let's go into future thinking, right? Call to action. What is going to be the relationship with children moving forward? And then how can we, as the companies, policymakers, academia, how can we, catch up with them and ensure that we're making the best, development for them? So I'm going to point it to Chanell. Are you good to go?
Yeah.
All right. So Chanell, I just want to be sure. Yeah. So what are your thoughts as we close out? What are your thoughts moving forward?
I think there has to be a lot more collaboration and information sharing. I think where we've had projects running with companies, and especially also involving partners like Alan Turing, the huge amount of expertise at the Alan Turing Institute and in universities, as well as companies that have a bit more experience in a certain area, we find that that bringing together a lot more of the expertise is actually very, 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 very beneficial. I think it's one thing to be including children, but actually in those conversations. But on the flip flop side, and actually having worked on trying to keep teenagers safe by not doing things that they see as natural to do, we also have to understand that children tend to be higher risk takers. They won't necessarily have the same level of information that a company would have on where the risks of behavior and the risks of technology lie, but they are also the early adopters for the most part. There's, I think it's something insane, 80% of children have worked or played with an AI assistant, and that is drastically lower when we think about what it means for adults. But I think that to really understand the kind of challenges and what the solutions should be, I think there just needs to be a lot more collaboration across the different institutions.
Exactly. Sure. All right, June, take us away.
I completely agree. So we've done quite a bit of work on privacy-enhancing technologies, which are sort of these technical ways, potentially, of implementing a lot of the principles that have been discussed on stage. And I think, bridging that gap between what is, a politically very viable and politically appealing, aim or outcome with what is technically feasible and technically possible, and the kind of reality of what that means in terms of design and development is really key. So we've been involved a bit with Meta's high-level working group on privacy in that regard, and I think those conversations really, really bring home how important that collaborative aspect is. I think the last thing I'll say is that, in addition to that interfacing with AI systems, like I was saying earlier, it's also very much about the datafication of children, I think, and what can be gleaned from datafying them as a population. Of course, this has been happening for many decades. We've heard mention of things like test scores being used and so forth to sort of sort children into different categories, which has huge implications for the opportunities that they have in life. Humans have been manually executing algorithms of exclusion for a very long time. Artificial intelligence makes that much more kind of easy to do in a rapid and global sense, but there's nothing really artificial about that. So it's just really important, I think, to keep in mind that the way that, this kind of data footprint that I was referring to, that children are leaving online, whether they realize it or not, is really something that I'm increasingly aware of and want to highlight.
Thank you. And Vary?
Yeah, I mean, let's echo what's already been said around collaboration. I mean, we definitely need a lot more collaboration between industry, between academia, between policy and civil society, and creating those spaces for exploration and conversations, and spaces where we can acknowledge the gaps in understanding and current knowledge base, and ask the questions around, there's lots of things we don't yet know that we need more research, we need to explore and understand. I think often there's a tendency to try and kind of package things up and know the answers and then take them out into those conversations. But actually we need to acknowledge, as we're innovating with new technologies, thinking about new applications for those technologies, we need to have those spaces for exploration and discussions, and children to be in those spaces, which I think is really, really important.
Yeah, thank you all so much. So my favorite cartoon growing up was Scooby-Doo, and I guess we've solved a bit of the mystery on the future of AI in play. So a round of applause for our wonderful panelists. Amazing. Thank you. So if you have any more questions, be sure to reach out to them. Thank you all so much.